Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2023. Thanks for joining us for another really great panel. We've had a great day of content so far. We've got a couple more panels left today and a whole bunch of content teed up for tomorrow. Just a reminder that all the sessions are starting to go up on Streaming Media's YouTube page. So you can go, as Steve will put a link in the chat where you can find that. And then all the panels and all the sessions will be up on Streaming Media's YouTube page by the latest next week. That's thing number one. Thing number two, you can enter to win a $50 Amazon gift card by naming the band or artist and song or piece of music that was just playing in the chat. The first one to do that, who is still here at the end of this panel, will qualify, will actually win that $50 gift card. But you have to get the answers correct, and you still have to be here at the end of the panel. Two qualifications. Another thing to note, we are launching our first Streaming Media East in New York, at least in some time, in my first big partnership with Streaming Media IRL in New York City. Next May 2024 at the Intercontinental Barclay Hotel here in New York, May 20th through the 22nd. So first, save those dates. It's going to be rocking. We're going to have an awesome time here in New York City in spring, a great time to be here. And we are taking submissions for speakers and panelists and things like that right now. So send Streaming Media your ideas for panels or keynotes or content for the conference. And if you want to hang out with me in New York City and see my New York City, please circle those dates and get ready to have a great time next May. So I think that's all the busy work that I had set for right now. So without further ado, I want to introduce our next panel, which is called Up and Away, Cloud Workflows for Streaming and CTV. And I want to bring our moderator to the stage, our excellent and brilliant moderator, Steve Vonder, Senior Analyst from IntelliVid Research.
Hey, Evan, thanks for having us here at Stream Media Connect. And no
see
doubt
it.
that everyone will be staying to the bitter end because we got count them, five great panelists to talk about cloud media workflows. And when you talk about the attention being paid to cloud workflows today, a lot of controversy, a lot of issues surrounding the implementation of cloud and making that decision between cloud and or on-premises implementation of those types of solutions. And so what we're going to do here is we have five panelists. I'm going to bring them on board one by one, have them introduce themselves. And I'm going to ask them a targeted question related to some of their experience with cloud workflows. After that, we'll have a roundtable discussion with all five panelists pitching in. And you're going to pitch in too, because we're going to expect you to hit the Q&A button. Tell us about the things that you want to talk about. Tell us about the things that you would like to hear the panelists discuss in the session on cloud media workflows. But without further ado, let's have Loke Dupont from TV2 activate his camera and come on up. And there he is, straight from Denmark. How you doing, Loke?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Steve.
Well, we appreciate you coming here and talking with us. You're a staff and engineer at TV2. Tell us what that entails. Tell us what TV2 is all about. And then also, if as you're doing the introduction of your role, if you could tell us a little bit about how you folks are using cloud workflows today and the process you've gone through in terms of trying to decide or make that decision for a go, no-go decision on cloud media solutions.
Sure. Yeah, as you said, I'm a staff engineer at TV2 Denmark. There's a TV2 Norway as well, but as you rightly mentioned, I'm in Denmark. Yeah, we are the largest commercial broadcaster in Denmark. More than 50% of all TV viewing in Denmark is one of our channels, so we have a quite comfortable market position there. We're a little bit different in that we are actually owned by the Danish government, but we act as a commercial entity. My role as staff engineer means that I work with our engineering manager for our streaming and player team in this case to sort of guide the team on technical decisions, architecture, which sort of where we need to go next and which things we need to implement next in sort of cooperation with our product managers, of course, and try and sort of shape the outcome of the tech side of things. we've been using cloud for quite a while. I mainly work with the part that's distribution, so from already produced content and to the consumer, and that's been using cloud for quite a while now. We're starting to add it on the side where we receive content, but still a lot of stuff is on premise. In our case, a lot of the channel playout, for instance, is still on premise.
Well, we're be very interested in diving more deeply into into some of the issues and challenges you're facing in terms of that cloud implementation. But for now, let's draw in Waseem Ahmad from EY. Do we call you an accounting firm anymore, or is it
Oh, we're consultant. We're doing a little bit of everything, right?
A little bit of everything
Roots,
at EY.
roots,
So,
absolutely in consulting or in accounting. Sorry, yes.
No problem. So tell us a little bit about your role at EY. We wouldn't necessarily typically associate video production with a consulting firm like yours, but actually you're probably were cloud media workflows before cloud media workflows were cool.
Very fair statement. So yes, I am the global lead for streaming media services. We look after all the top shelf production, which would have a streaming component connected to it. On my global team, we have a series of subject matter experts for webcasting, for events, and also broadcast engineers to kind of make all this come together and work very specifically for an enterprise corporation type of environment. We will push, at least, my team, there's various teams across the globe at EY who support webcasting in general, and we'll do 1,000 plus events yearly, right? Which is, I would say, pretty impressive when it comes to an enterprise.
I would wholeheartedly concur with that. Very impressive.
I appreciate that. And my remit is really building and creating the workflow that's involved with how we get talent from wherever they are to them being seen and heard and experienced on a platform of any given solution that we have, right? We have a series of solutions that we use internally, and ultimately it's that challenge, right? That excitement of taking speaker A, B, C, and D, making them look good, sound good, mixing in their content, and then providing it to the audience in hand. It's exciting, it's challenging, and cloud workflows, I would say, pretty much like a lot of us in the enterprise space, we forcefully embraced it come 2020, right? Yeah. And quite honestly, I don't think there's any turning back at this point.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pandemic and the impact that's had on video adoption. Let's bring in Richard Andes from Telestream. Richard, if you can activate your video, hello there. You're the Director of Customer Success over at Telestream. Tell us what that means, and in your role, what was your experience during COVID and how it helped trigger the adoption of some of these cloud technologies?
Absolutely. So our customer success program, it's a collection of our technical account managers and customer success managers. We focus more on long-term strategic partners going over projects rather than sort of like a traditional transactional relationship. We do a lot of long-term road mapping, a lot of long-term migration type strategies. So it goes hand in hand a lot with the cloud migrations we've been doing for customers. The pandemic, I think Waseem defined it correctly as we sort of dived in whether we wanted to or not on some of these things. As the reality of shifting to being a remote workforce came into being for us, our customers, for everybody, it was a rapid shift in the type of technologies needed to get the job done. And with that came really quickly, I can't just have everything in my data center and 500 users VPNing it into it. I need other places I can use, or get my hands on resources. So a lot of cloud workflows. We had a lot of customers who were already working, sort of dipping their toes in, some getting more serious in cloud, but a lot that circumstance of going into that new environment that was invoked by COVID, it accelerated a lot of those plans. So a lot of people had to jump quicker, maybe with some things that weren't quite 100% ready for the cloud. And then a lot of customers who hadn't considered it yet suddenly found themselves having to look at options, started with just posted solutions by a third party and then into building some of their own cloud solutions with it. So It's been an interesting endeavor. Most customers have continued to embrace it. We've seen some people, as sort of a return to office has happened for some. We've seen some people move back into more hybrid again. But a lot of the technology is there, and it's there to stay. So it's become central. Even if you're on-prem, you're using some sort of service, you're sending something out for. So no matter what, a lot of that technology is now part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, so that's great insight, Richard. Now let's bring in Rick Capstraw from Signiant. Rick, can you tell us a little bit about how Signiant helps the video production process and what you're seeing now post-pandemic in the media world today in terms of how some of these cloud solutions are actually being used? Is it the way that some vendors like to portray work in the ether out there?
Of course, it's exactly the way any vendors on this panel would portray it, for sure.
Absolutely.
No, yes. So for anyone thanks for having me, Steve, first of all, but for anyone who's not familiar with Signiant, so we operate a SaaS content exchange platform across really the entire media and entertainment supply chain. So everything from on set at a film production to in a truck at a stadium for a broadcast sports production, and then through post-production, localization, packaging, and then to final finished distribution. So anywhere that our customers are exchanging content, either within their own supply chain operations or with their partners and ecosystem, that's where the Signiant platform really shines and provides an accelerated and secure and fully visible way to track and distribute your content. So, that really gives us kind of at a macro view a really good understanding of where content is flowing to and from, especially from a storage location. And no question, over the last 5 years, we've seen a huge growth in content flowing to, through, and out of the cloud. I think the one thing that's kind of surprised me at this point, if you would have said, what's it going to look like a few years ago, is that though we've seen a huge influx of usage of cloud, we see pretty even both flow into the cloud and flow out of the cloud. It's pretty close to 50-50. So I'm a little surprised by that, in that I think years ago, everyone was thinking that we're gonna get media right off the camera, put it in the cloud, and then everybody will work from there. And though it seems like a very good kind of midpoint for distributing to editors, users, etc., we still see it going in and out on a very consistent basis. So that's maybe something we can think about and look at in this panel, but that to me is a little bit surprising.
Yeah, it is a big issue, and I definitely want to talk more about it. But first, let's bring in Corey Smith from CBS Sports, Senior Director of Advanced Production over there. Corey, tell us a little bit about your role at CBS Sports, and maybe give us a little glimpse at how your workflows have changed as a result of the adoption of some cloud capabilities. Or are we looking at a CBS Sports now that's an all cloud operation, a hybrid? What's it looking like these days?
Well, thanks, Steve, for having us. Should be a great panel here today. My overall role right now in CBS Sports is basically to manage our MCR, PCR infrastructure in cloud, extend the lifespan of our facility and our sports operations on the ground. We're very much a hybrid kind of platform play, if you will. A lot of stuff within our facilities doesn't require us to continue building and expanding in the traditional four walls in a building kind of scenario, where we can actually take some of the lightweight tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 type of sporting events that are more or less packaging and distribution. We do a lot of that in cloud. Most recently, we launched the Galaza Network, which is a 24/7 sports soccer network dedicated to soccer year round. And so that is predominantly done 100% in cloud outside of some of our desk shows. So we're using our studios and facilities to produce desk show content where the talent can talk to each other in real time. They can do call-in and interviews with other players and coaches and that kind of thing around the leagues. But culminating all of that contribution into our cloud-based environment, where all of our playout systems, all our cloud recording, our clipping, distribution, captions, what you would typically find in a facility from an MCR perspective, we're starting to build now in cloud. So we can extend our operations from both on site at a venue somewhere to from our facilities and our desk shows. So we're primarily investigating more or less advanced production type of technology services that we can actually offer our legacy businesses to kind of continue to expand and be creative about how we use our space.
Yeah, so let's stay with you, Gore, as we enter our roundtable discussion now. First, let's talk. You talked about extending the capabilities for your video production workflow. Which is better for doing things at scale? Is it or what role can cloud play in that realm? Is our cloud solutions kind of considered to be kids' table stuff and not able to handle the scale, or does it bring something to bear that maybe you don't get with an on-premises type of offering?
Well, I think it's a great question, but I think that it also is based on the type of production you're trying to do, right? So when you start looking at more REMI type of applications for cloud, I think that there's a good fit there. But sometimes, when you are having long haul discussions between, talent at a desk, and again, interviews that are coming in from other places, you still are kind of requiring the lower latency kind of communications protocols to allow that seamless operation to or that show to kind of evolve. And so what we do with the cloud-based hybrid stuff is that we get them to be the creative resources in the studios. And then we take that content, move it to cloud, and then we kind of mix the production there. Whether it's a live sporting event that we acquire directly from the cloud, we mix in the on-site desk shows at our facilities, kind of mix them in between a halftime, pregame, postgame kind of show. But we do acquire feeds from other partners that are delivering the content to us, and we're kind of decorating those as you would see like any other kind of major sporting event, but we're mixing it in cloud instead.
Now, Loke, at TV2, you handle huge volumes of content. What's your thoughts on leveraging cloud solutions to scale up for major encoding and video archiving activity?
I think it's almost a necessity if you have changes where, okay, maybe you get a bunch of content that you license from some external party. You get a catalog of let's say 1,000 assets that you have to ingest within a certain time period, and nobody wants to have that spare capacity on site, because that's equipment that sits dormant most of the time, and you basically wasted money for something that's not going to be used anywhere, right? So if you're dealing in a world where things like that change all the time, where you get a bunch of content that you have to ingest to a platform that you license an entire catalog from some other party, you almost have to build it in a cloud environment, because it's the only way that you can actually, within a reasonable time frame, handle, process, and get that content ready for distribution. Sure, you could do it on premise, but you're going to end up with a situation where you either have a lot of wasted time on machines that you purchased and have sitting around, or you end up stretching out that timeline a lot more. So, okay, maybe you can't do it in 1 month or 2 months. This take half a year for us to get the content ready. And I think in the very competitive world of streaming services, nobody wants to wait around for that long if there's an opportunity to get something there right away.
Once that strategic partner is served up the content, they want it up yesterday, don't they?
Exactly. And also, by the way, in terms of sports, following on from what Corey said, I think there's definitely also a case for sports where, since sports is sort of, it doesn't follow a nicely schedule. It's there when it's there. You have to be able to show it when it's live. Nobody wants to watch sports with a delay or at some other point in time, right? And some sports events you have, it's easy. It's just a football match. There's only one field. That's it. Other stuff like Wimbledon, for instance, you have multiple different courts going at the same time. And in a cloud environment, you have the ability to scale that up and have more live channels than you have available on traditional broadcast. And so that's also a case where I think the cloud maybe contributes something.
Now, Richard from Telestream, as a vendor of these solutions, both on premises and cloud, what have you seen in terms of video production, video producers' reticence towards moving to the cloud? Are a lot of people set in the way they're doing things? Is it tough to get people to embrace cloud? Talk a little bit about how video producers overall, in your experience and Telestream's experience, how anxious are they to make the move to the cloud?
I think it's a mix on a lot of bigger ones. I think to points Loke and Corey made, the scalability factor is very appealing. Especially as there is a need and a desire to market more sort of secondary streams. So the extra courts at Wimbledon, in-car cameras for racing events, things like that. If you wanted to build all this out of traditional infrastructure and more, physical servers sitting there constantly for all your little streams, it's just not worth the expense. You cannot create that kind of user experience for the consumer in a reasonable cost. Cloud allows you to do that, spin up those extra channels when you need them. We talk a lot about sort of like capacity as a scaling up, but scaling down is just as important. You build this out for when you need it, but when you don't, it goes away and you're not spending any money on it. You're not maintaining servers. You don't have an IT team worrying about their quarterly updates or anything like that. It really simplifies a lot of things in that mindset when, from a production standpoint, you want to look at, let me add this extra stream, this extra feature, this extra unique experience for the consumer. You can do that more freely because cloud sort of has that flexibility. The sort of reticence and the resistance to it, I wouldn't even call it resistance, but just the places where it's not as effective mostly come to things with really quick turnarounds. And most of that has to do with like on-prem production needing to be done on site. Direct linear records need to happen because you can play them out with a couple minute delay rather than having to do a file process or ship it to some other, virtual headed in the cloud type idea. I think those are the parts where from production standpoints, we still really see a lot of the traditional workflows are much better. But once that mainstream has been produced and you're ready to build those additional channels and you're ready to get the content out there, and you need to scale it up so that you have, multiple endpoints across the world and you can spin up little substreams sort of on demand. That is where cloud's offering a huge, awakening to be able to offer so much more to the consumer. And I think we see it embraced a lot by, groups like Corey's working with and things like that. And it's making, a much more flexible environment, which allows people to do cooler things for the consumer, makes all of the streaming experience more enjoyable.
Yeah, and Waseem, give us some front row experience from your use of cloud workflows. Would you ever go back to on-premises style solutions? I guess you almost don't know any other way at this point, do you?
Well, it's comical, right? We're actually looking at creating on-prem solutions in key offices only because we want to look at marrying the convenience factor, right? For the talent. Our use case is very different where we have to have speed, right? So something Richard was just touching on is being able to spin up an event for whatever reason it is in minutes. And we can do that because of how we're built with a cloud workflow. If you try to do that with an on-premise situation, I mean, scheduling, resourcing, you run into all these challenges, even redundancy, right? To make sure that the talent is ready and you're good to go. But for us, it's like, well, we actually kind of need that now as well, because talent might be situated in a location where it's much more convenient for them to be on site, and we're passing signal and content over the cloud and marrying that together with perhaps another REMI location, right? Or even considering, as EY is so large, we're gonna have multiple locations we gotta plug together over the cloud and pull in SRT and leverage things like NDI to make these productions happen, right? There's a lot of marionette action taking place behind the scenes that gets ignored or forgotten. And the cost effectiveness on how this happens, it's much more cost effective to do this on the cloud, right? I mean, if we were to bring something to the simplest form, what we're all engaged in right now is a cloud production, right? We were joking about this in the green room earlier. So there's a lot that can be taken in how to do something. I think the magic really is understanding your use case and then piecing that together to make it effective and work for you as an organization.
Yeah, so you have this balancing act, Rick Capstraw, between sometimes using on premises, sometimes using cloud. How does that inform Signiant's go-to-market proposition over time? How are you positioning Signiant to deal with this kind of the new reality of at least a portion of the work being handled on a cloud basis?
Well, I mean, specifically for Signiant, it's pretty easy because we're storage agnostic. So the vendor doesn't matter, location doesn't matter, cloud, S3 compatible, on-prem, it doesn't make any real difference to us. And the way I look at kind of what we're seeing here is no different than we see all the time in like technology hype cycle, right? A few years ago is, all right, what's your cloud strategy? You got to move play out to the cloud. We got to move our archive to the cloud. And a whole lot of how are we going to leverage this? We're seeing the same thing right now with AI. Yeah, you could do a billion things. But really kind of what Corey and Richard and Waseem outlined is, you're thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and what is the right tool for that job. And in some cases, it's going to be a cloud workflow, especially if you're looking for flexibility and speed and kind of some of the stuff we just talked about. But then if you've got a 24/7 broadcast file-based channel coming out, playing out all the time, why would you need that in the cloud? You've got a perfectly good broadcast center. So it's really, to me, it's kind of about what can we enable for a consumer from a services standpoint. And when you start to see exciting content things like, in the sports world, we've got like Manning Cast on the Thursday night game. And then I think really short-term events are a huge opportunity. Like some of the team was saying, Wimbledon or the Olympics coming up next year for NBC and UEFA Euros. There's going to be an enormous amount of content that doesn't go into the broadcast produced in a short window of time, and being able to get that content to the creative users that can actually do something compelling with it in a quick manner is a really good use case for cloud. So, get it in there, find discoverability and searchability and the ability to get it where it needs to go to be produced. Like that to me is kind of the way I generally think, and what we try to enable at Signiant is the ability to access the content created, whether it's offset or event or a live broadcast, so that the smart creative product builders can do something with it to fill a consumer need. And so from our standpoint, that's kind of how we look at where cloud is appropriate and where it isn't. And I think we've seen a big kind of shift of, we're moving everything. Oh, wait, actually, that's going to cost a crap load of money. What actually are we trying to do here? And so I think a lot of what the guys have been talking about here is really compelling use cases for cloud, but it's not necessarily for everything.
Yeah, and we're already getting a lot of questions coming in, Rick, regarding how people are going through the implementation process. And actually, attendee Eric Walsh points this question to you, Corey Smith. He asked, what is one of the more challenging aspects to solve by moving traditional MCR and traditional broadcast production workflows to the cloud? Is there any advantage that we might see from live sports over other content in this regard?
Well, so I'm going to try to answer it the best way I can, but it's really a financial question, right? So
it all comes down to dollars and cents, doesn't it?
Exactly right. Like, do you have the money? Do you really want to keep all of your productions, PCR, MCR wise, inside of a physical facility, right? So one of the things that we've looked at, and again, I'll be at CBS Sports 2 years in March, so I'm really kind of like trying to tune up a lot of these different workflows and try to help the business save money by not having to expand the physical facilities for all of these different control rooms to take in these alternate kind of traffic streams, if you will. If we do, like Loke pointed out earlier, the licensing for UEFA or other type of Serie A soccer type of events, like we have a lot of those soccer events that just don't need studio presence at all. There's no desk show around it. There's things that we do for that show that we decorate it, package it, send it off to Paramount Plus as a single event. But if we had to have an actual PCR in a facility to actually manage that broadcast, not only do we have to have the capacity in that facility, but we also have to have the people to man it and the infrastructure to be able to support it, from a master control switcher, potentially replay, graphics ops, all these type of things that you would typically need for a television production. We can migrate all of that workflow to cloud and do it very cost effectively by spinning up the equipment, spinning it off. As Waseem pointed out, it's like a light switch. It's a metered based service that we can turn on and off as we need to, as opposed to spending so much money on CapEx, not only expanding our facility space, but also all of the gear that goes into it that's going to sit dormant for 5 or 6 months while the seasons are on hiatus. Sure, we can try to reuse those facilities, but at the end of the day, we're far more scalable, and we can use the CapEx we would normally spend on expanding that studio footprint in a cloud-based workflow that doesn't cost us 3 or 5 years in amortized cost and depreciation schedules of hardware equipment. Hardware these days, and even through the pandemic, it was very difficult to get hardware because of supply chain issues and other things that were kind of bogging down all of that process. So by the time you get a PO in the system to buy gear, you're 6 months out from when you originally started having that discussion. Where in clouds, I can be at that same capacity in 6 days. So it's really about like, how much scale do you really need in a facility, and can you move that scale out to a cloud-based workflow? And we've done it very successfully with the Galaza network, and we hope to do other kind of digital linear networks. I want to try to get away from us using fast channel, because these things aren't fast channels. These are regular linear networks, but in a digital kind of distribution model. I think because we're running out of tower space. Nobody's on traditional cable anymore. This is the new optimal medium for consuming this content. And the streaming wars aren't over by any means. It's the guy standing at the top of the mountain is the guy that has the best content, right? Yeah. And has been able to do it cost effectively.
Right.
Yeah, and I was gonna
go ahead, Richard.
I was gonna add, because I think one of the other things too with when you are budgeting, sort of going around that idea, is that when you are looking at, and be it an event-based stream or even be it a 24/7 stream, one of the big differences of coming off of the traditional capital, cap expense model, where you got to figure out, I'm buying this for X number of years, I need to factor in yearly support, upgrades, and other things throughout it. It's easier for, especially something that would be traditionally be a lower expense production. Maybe it's, a smaller league sport event, something like that, to be able to come in and just go, okay, this is my cost per minute or per hour, however you look at it, to do this. And I don't have to go figure out front-end capital money. I don't need to figure out, facility expenses, hiring extra, staff to run and monitor it. It is simply, this is my cost per minute to execute this, because I just go, here's my services, add up that cost, boom, I'm good to go. And so it makes it a lot easier to sort of like estimate what your budget for an event's going to be up front. And then also, operationally, how that's going to look long term. So it's an easier way. I think we see a lot of new things coming to streaming in the last few years, especially for live events. And as Corey mentioned, some of the stuff CBS doing with soccer, it's great examples of things that previously we might not have seen, because the upfront capital expense was just too high to, in some aspects, people would say, risk it, whereas this is much more predictable almost. So you can say, yeah, it's worth giving it a shot. And I think we've seen a lot of cool new things come to the consumer marketplace as a result.
Well, I'll tell you what, the dollar signs do really matter when it comes to cloud implementation. If the Q&A is any indication, Loki from TV2, maybe you can help us out on this cost question here. An anonymous attendee, don't be so shy next time, just tell us who you are. How many people are managing cloud-related costs now? Internal auditing or service tools or third-party tools? How are they keeping costs down but quality high when providing close to 24-hour live production delivery and workflows? So if you're using cloud all the time, how do you make sure that you do it as cost efficiently as possible?
That's an excellent question. I mean, thankfully, at least the cloud I use the most, AWS, has pretty good calculators to try and figure out how much is a given workload going to cost. Of course, this becomes more complicated the more machines that's involved. Like if you have machines doing graphics, machines doing mixing, machines doing whatever else that's part of a live production, for instance, that becomes a more complex calculation. But it's also usually pretty easy to spin up a environment and then figure out, okay, what is this actually costing us to figure that out. One thing that also becomes a little bit tricky here, and I think building on what Richard and Corey said, was that, yeah, you get this benefit of being able to have only pay for the time you use. So if you only use a little bit amount of it, you don't have to pay for something that you're not using for a longer time. The sort of other side of that is that you now have to pay for everything. And that means, is it really worth it to broadcast this event that might only have 2 viewers, because now the cost is associated with that particular event? If you have a live channel that you have to fill all the time, there's really no extra cost to running that event besides the commentators that are on there, but there's no infrastructure cost because it's already stuff you had on premise, so you can run that. That's not a problem. If you're in a cloud environment, that brings with it a cost right there. So you could spin up 100 channels to run 100 different events. But is it worth it compared to the viewership you're going to get? Because the viewership might be low, especially if you're running 100 at the same time. So it also becomes a question of, for everything, it's not just a question of, okay, can we do this? It becomes a question of, is this actually worth it? And we're so used to, I think, a lot of organizations, the TV stations, are used to the constraint being, okay, do we have the capacity? Do we have the gear in the basement somewhere? Can we actually run this? Is there enough capacity on the existing hardware? Now that constraint is gone. So what else is constraining budgeting, right? Because suddenly the sort of the production IT guys now suddenly have a budget that just grows with all the great ideas that the creative side wants to do, without any sort of handle on, okay, how do we transfer that to where the money actually comes in on the other side, right? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. There's definitely challenges trying to nail down what a specific workflow costs, but I think there's a lot of tools to do that, and there's a lot of capability to, in the cloud, since it doesn't cost anything over a longer term, you can just spin it up and measure what's the bill for this hour we've run it. So that's actually solved. I think a much bigger problem is what do we do when capacity is unlimited, and how do we then constrain what we're gonna do?
Yeah, Rick, you have some thoughts you want to throw?
Oh, sorry.
No,
Steve.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that's a really good point that Loke made. I mean, I'm actually a little surprised to hear that you feel like the calculators are easy to use, because we see all of the time. I after the fact, oh, holy crap, I didn't realize that was going to cost me much. But I think that the last point you made there, I think, is a really interesting one in terms of changing kind of the dynamic of budgeting and projects, and how especially we think about it in conjunction of technology providers, engineers, and creatives. Because I have this concept that I kind of try to use in evaluating these things, which is, what is the next business action you would take if you do this? Like we're at a point in technology these days where we could pretty much do almost anything. But if you do that thing and it costs you X, what is the actual next business action that you're going to take that's going to make it worth that investment? You see this all the time, and especially, cloud and AI really makes this possible, but all the time discussion about your archive of content, and if we could run it all through AI recognition and get all the metadata that we don't have and figure out what we have on LTO tapes, we could we could monetize that into a lot of profit. But okay, it's going to cost you several $1 million to do that, no matter how you do it. And then what exactly is that next ... step before you get to profit? What are you going to do? And that, I think, is a really interesting cost versus benefit conversation that's new in the industry, because the technology providing side of our businesses and the creative distribution side of our businesses really have never been tightly aligned to each other. So, that's a conversation that we see all the time, which is not a solution to the question that was being asked of how you manage your costs, but an added complexity that we got to figure out a way to kind of validate.
Yeah.
So
No, same for
especially Waseem and Corey, like how you decide whether we should do a thing.
Well, I'll let Waseem answer first, and then I'll go.
Sure. Thanks.
Go ahead, Waseem.
I was just going to chime in real quick, right? From an enterprise perspective, the ROI is quite rapid, right? If you think prior to 2020, if we had to do an event, it was a huge deal, right? We had to find a studio, we had to rent that studio, the resourcing. It was a big undertaking to make that event happen, and it cost a lot, right? And these types of events that happen, for example, if you look at America's All Hands, right? There was an exponential cost to make that happen. So they happen very, very infrequently. Now, because we're so flexible, we have, these licenses for various services, cloud-based, we're very decentralized. So we have a bunch of MCRs if you look at it at the end of the day, right? And that allows us to be very nimble. And because we're able to do these things virtually, if you will, over the cloud, leveraging various services, it's so quick. Now that one event that happened perhaps yearly, they're quarterly at this point now. So it's impressive what you can do if you understand your use case, and it is highly cost effective once you begin to master that and you've created a workflow that's comfortable.
Right.
Or you have some thoughts?
Yeah, the cost and the archive pieces, and then I'll touch on something Waseem just brought up as well. So the cost for us, like, if you look at what NBA League Pass and some of the other services that allow you to watch any game you want anywhere in the country at any given time, that's the larger content plan. That's what we're ultimately trying to do with some of our soccer properties. So I could run, on a random Thursday, I can have 32 different live soccer matches coming in from anywhere in the world into my cloud-based infrastructure, and I could be porting that over to Paramount Plus for people to come in and watch the shows that they want to watch, or the live matches they want to watch. But then I can take that same infrastructure, turn it around on a Saturday for NCAA football, and then on Sunday for NFL. So it's all reusing the same infrastructure as opposed to having these dedicated support studios to be able to actually do this. And I would say that the archive and the rewatch factor is pretty low when it comes to sports content, because by the time 24 hours expires, you can watch that same highlight on 20 different other digital services that you subscribe to, whether it's your favorite sporting website or an actual media outlet of some other kind. So for us, there's not a lot of archive strategy built in, at least not the soccer stuff, because by the time it's not, the fans aren't worth watching it after 24 hours because it's already cold, it's already dead. They already know what happened. They're already looking forward to the next match. So providing as much content as possible in an agile way, in high quality, it attracts those audiences, and we'll build those numbers, and it won't be such a weird upside down licensing model as well, because we're not putting all of this back-breaking kind of production into it. We're never going to get away from the tier ones of the world, having truck models and rolling to venues and doing that kind of thing. That's all going to be, flagship type broadcast property type stuff. But when it comes to some of this very dense kind of production stuff, you could take, Major League Baseball as an example. I mean, how many events are happening every week during the course of the season? And you may catch 15 of your favorite team's games over the course of the season, unless you're diehard and you're sitting there watching it, but you don't get the broadcast rights everywhere you're at. So for us on the digital side, we can provide a breakthrough of those DMA structures that we have that tells us we can broadcast certain things in certain regions in a digital world, because we're not subjected with the space allocations on the satellite. We're not on the tower space, the traditional kind of cable dish model, if you will. So for us, it's going about the big sets of content, and that's eventually going to be the big play, because nobody cares, I don't think, personally, about whether or not I can watch it on traditional television or not, because my television is now my mobile device.
Yeah. Well, let's move beyond some of the costs and expense discussion, maybe touch base on some actual technology issues. And I'm going to take this first question that's targeted to you, Waseem. How do you ensure data security and compliance when using streaming platforms and cloud-based solutions for financially oriented content? So there, in the fintech side, there's big users of online video for communications among financial services companies. EY is dealing with those types of companies. You're doing video on the cloud. Is security a concern?
Oh, absolutely. That is probably first and foremost next to redundancy, right? For us when it comes to delivering anything. We're fortunate in the sense that our viewership is behind the firewall, right? Irrelevant of how you're connecting, whether you're connecting from home or you're connecting from within the office, right? All of our content is behind SSO, right? All of our content requires a laptop that is signed and signatured, and it looks for these signatures when you're attempting to join, right? So we have that layer of the firewall that protects us. And then we go through rigorous InfoSec requirements, right? SOC testing and so forth, and pen testing and all that. We have very tight contracts that are signed with these service providers, right? And we actually use various providers for various reasons at times too. We also implement a self-service model where people can use things like Teams webinar, right, or Teams on event, to do what they need to. And we understand that content security is not as tight as it needs to be, because again, people are only connecting behind the firewall to engage in these experiences. But when we do something that's an all hands, for example, the contents itself then is very is reviewed, if you will, right, to make sure if something were to leak, and these leaks happen from everybody, right? These are more so things that are regurgitated, right? But it's safe for consumption, if you will. We're not in a position where somebody's stolen a file or an asset or something that's part of an event or experience. So there's a lot of signatures that take place when it comes to choosing what solutions we use and how they're implemented. And it's InfoSec, right? You really need to sell them on what the requirement is. And if they're your friend, you got to have some good friends in InfoSec, in my opinion, right? They'll work with you and they'll make these things come to fruition.
Yeah. Now, beyond security, there are other elements of working in the cloud from a technology basis. And I think this next question from the audience may be well pointed towards both Rick and Richard. We'll start with Rick, and if you have some thoughts on it, that'd be great. How are people best handling reservation, redundancy, and quick restorations of images to cloud instances to ensure the kind of availability they need of performance machines and closest data center access for their on-demand use live streaming cloud production? So basically, how do you make sure you have access to your cloud all the time? How do you make sure that the data center is working the way that you want it to work? I know that you at Signia deal with a lot of file transfers. Is that a question you want to tackle there, Rick?
Sure. I'll take a first stab and hand over to Richard. I think first and foremost, of course, you end up with kind of network discussions there. If you don't have network, then you don't have access. So that's kind of baseline. But we deal with a lot of duplication from a good standpoint and from a bad standpoint. I think just backup, multi-tiered database structure, tiered storage, rule sets, and automation. So I think we see a lot of, definitely, as some of the team mentioned here, redundancy is in the forefront of everyone's mind. So I don't honestly see a whole lot of trouble in terms of making sure that there's copies and backup. making sure that those are accessible and easy to find is kind of a much bigger challenge. I think we see a lot of, and this is a big challenge in the cloud space as well, because there's a significant, or can be significant, cost element to storing stuff that maybe you needed for quick redundancy but no longer need. And so I think the creation and insurance that exists is probably pretty well understood and documented, and then the cleanup and archiving of what actually is needed and restorable at a reasonable timeline is where the complexity comes in. So great, you can send stuff to Glacier, but then you need to get it back from Glacier, and how long does that take? And the Amazon's done a pretty good job, as well as the other cloud providers, in providing a lot of different tiering to try to hit exactly the use case that you're looking for. But from a Signiant perspective, that's why we try to provide a completely storage agnostic fabric. So if it's on-prem, it's in the cloud, it's in Glacier, we can provide a way to access that. And then it's really all around automation and workflow of how quickly might you need it back, if you need it back, and then that'll kind of dictate where it goes. But I'll hand over to Richard.
Yeah, Richard is Director of Customer Success. Do you get more panic calls on average from cloud customers or on-premise customers?
Actually, I'd say probably more panic calls from on-prem.
Really?
I think initially it was more from cloud, but I think that actually has changed a fair bit. Cloud, I think there's sort of two parts to the answer here. One is very much like if you want some extra redundancy, if you want to make sure nothing's going to interfere with your particular processes, there are options in the cloud. You can do reserved instances. You can spin up 2 instances so you have a hot backup available. There are things like that it's basically just very, again, it goes back to a bit of that discussion of budgeting. It's just is this a high caliber enough event that I'm willing to spend enough extra money to keep a second encoder instance running or something like that. So for live production, you just factor that redundancy directly into your budget. So I think a lot of that is very clear cut, and I think as people have realized that and been willing to just set up that second encoder or whatever, we've seen a lot of those sort of instances calm down. The other part of it, though, is also working in environments, and whether you're building your own sort of controllers or if you're working with a vendor who's building it for you, is to for things that aren't necessarily totally in that live environment. This goes to some of what Rick was saying. Things about like if how do I maintain sort of continuity should I have some problem? In a large fan out transcoding environment, you're trying to transcode 300 files at the same time. If 2 of those fail and die, what happens? Okay, the orchestration layer should auto retry those. So those things just need to be accounted into the platform that's driving a lot of these operations. Same thing, if you try to access a piece of media and in one location it's bad, but there's a redundant copy maybe in another bucket that's in Glacier, cool, let's go ahead and execute a restore command from Glacier, get that file, use it for the transcode. So that would have to be a relational link within your media management to know that there's that backup copy in Glacier. So it's just a lot of that, making sure that the platform level has the awareness to control and restart, look for secondary backup copies and those kinds of things. In terms of, I know part of the question too was also a bit about like the idea of like quick restoration of images and things like that. So if you are using particularly sort of infrastructure as a service, leveraging whatever cloud environment you're in, leveraging what they support in terms of scripting or redundancy controls. So whether or not it's firing off a Terraform to spin up 4 nodes for you or something like that, it's being aware of what's available that can do those kinds of things for you quickly and efficiently. So we're not. People talk a lot of traditionally on-prem disaster recovery, the idea of where do I go to spin up a whole new place, and then also business continuity, which is how do I just keep operating, and they're hand in hand, but they're very different. Cloud's interesting because if you want it, continuity is a little bit easier, but you do have to pay for it. You're not getting away from paying for anything, obviously, but in cloud it is a little bit easier because you can, like I said, if you want to have a second version of an encoder spun up, cool, just spin up 2 instances instead of 1. If you want to make sure that nothing interferes with your transcode operation, make sure you do an on-demand instance instead of a spot. There's choices you can make if it's worth the money. So I think cloud does open up a lot of really interesting things with that, but it does interestingly loop back to that budgeting discussion very quickly.
Well,
Absolutely.
it reaches back to a larger discussion that we haven't really talked on, is the operational aspect of it.
Mhm.
Like you could spin up, like as an example, I've got 120 different MCR kind of configurations in our cloud infrastructure across 5 regions in AWS. So for us, it's really like being able to provide both business continuity, but also the operators need to know, like, from their day-to-day workload or week-to-week workload, what nodes they're going to be actually on, what compute they're going to be on, and keep it all kind of in sync, right? Whether it's updated slates or bugs that need to be for that particular broadcast, making sure that kind of the fleet management, if you will, like in a hardware-based environment, is very easy. I only have so many finite spaces in my rack for hardware. In cloud, now I've got 5 different regions that need the same kind of update and kind of care and feeding, so to speak.
Yeah, now we only have time for one more topic, and thank goodness we have a engineer from TV2 here to answer this question. Several questions on SRT. And is SRT the best affordable format of choice, Loke Dupont, for reliable point-to-point transmission from mobile cam units to cloud? A couple other questions related to SRT. Would you prefer to use SRT, WebRTC, RTMP? That which gives the small guy the best chance at looking like a major content producer? Any thoughts on these formats of choice, particularly as they pertain to cloud transmission?
Yeah, SRT is an excellent choice for a lot of things. It's well supported across everything. You can tweak it depending on your settings on both latency and whatever sort of quality of stream you want to send through it. So that's definitely a very good option, and a very popular option to getting stuff in and out of the cloud as well. I think there's a few questions related to other formats there. I would say RTMP, unless you're streaming to Twitch or something, stay away from RTMP. It's a very old protocol that's not even designed for video streaming, and it's not. It has a lot of support everywhere, but if there's SRT support, just don't do it.
It's not going to die yet,
WebRTC,
Loki. It's like we were talking about vinyl. Vinyl's still
I know.
here.
I know.
Away from RTMP, yeah.
But I think vinyl probably has more charm than RTMP does. WebRTC is great for like super real-time stuff. If you're doing like meeting stuff where you really want to see it now, that's a great choice. You wouldn't typically use SRT for that, because the latency, even if you tune it down, is just too high. A very common workflow that I've seen is using SRT to get stuff into the cloud environment, and then using NDI internally there between nodes, just because that's fairly easy to deal with. I think there was another question about 2110. Just want to say 2110 doesn't work in a cloud environment. Don't even try to get it there. So NDI and SRT is probably pretty good choices, especially if you don't have a lot of money to buy vendor-specific solutions out there. Then that's a good start.
Well, guys, it looks like our fun is over. Evan has shown up and is going to put an end to all of this. Thanks a lot, Evan.
That is your sign that your fun is over. Yes. Thanks, Steve. Thanks to the panelists. This was really great, really rich content environment here, getting lots of applause. Tons of folks here. Want to thank our sponsors of the panel, Telestream and Signiant, for making this panel possible. I want to congratulate our winner of the music contest, Ron Breyer, who got Rufus and Shaka Khan's Take Time. I want to remind you there's another panel coming up in just about a half an hour from now at 4 o'clock, and that's Quality and Quantity, Optimizing Live Streams at Scale, sponsored by Dolby. So thanks a lot, everybody, for the panel, for your time here. Great content, Steve. Great job moderating. And we'll see you in a half an hour for our next panel.
Thank you.